The Kansas City Chiefs are in crisis mode, and there's no guarantee they'll be competitive this season. That and more on today's edition of Locked On NFL.
The new Locked On NFL. The madman Tyler Rowland is your double shot of NFL espresso with the Locked On local experts on every major story. Get ready, Rowland is revving up. The new Locked On NFL starts now. Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Football fans, welcome into the Locked On NFL podcast, bringing you a double dose of the NFL's biggest stories with help from our local experts that know your favorite teams like no one else. I am your host, the madman, Tyler Rowland, joined today by Locked On NFL expert Nick Cattles. On today's show, we are going to talk about the Eagles and the Lions maybe losing their position in the NFC, the Ravens and the Bengals falling back in the AFC, but we got to start with a perennial power over the last decade, it seems like, in the Chiefs, who are currently in crisis mode. Before we dive into it, do want to thank you for making Locked On NFL your first listen. Thank you for making the Locked On Podcast Network the #1 sports podcast network. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Use your profit boost on an NBA future and get entered for your chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. Play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Nick, I got to tell you, I've been talking to some of the other hosts of Locked On NFL throughout the week as I've done the show leading up to this one. I had a lot of conversation about which teams are going to get better next year, which teams are going to get worse. And I continue to look at the Kansas City Chiefs, and I just don't know how to feel about them. Like, obviously, it's the Chiefs. But when is Patrick Mahomes going to come back from injury? What's going on with Travis Kelce? It sounds like they may cut Jawan Taylor, their starting right tackle. They're getting older on defense. Are they going to trade Trent McDuffie? You hear that in the wind a little bit. And then you get the situation with Rashee Rice, and it's like, how can I count on this team in a competitive AFC to actually be a contender next year? I'm looking at the playoff picture, and we got a lot to go. The free agency, the draft, trades, all that different stuff. But I'm looking at Kansas City right now, and if I had to make my playoffs, I would not have Kansas City in it.
You know, they've got a number of questions, but the first thing I want to just mention here, Tyler, is the fact that one overlooked aspect of Kansas City's team building over the past several years, going back to, Frank Clark, is their willingness to take risks on guys who have character questions and that have red flags surrounding them. There was Clark. There was obviously Tyreek Hill. For those who fell in love with the cheetah, go look at what happened in college and what he pled guilty to. And then you have Rice now, he's obviously causing issues. And I don't know him personally. Allegations are allegations, but he already has a couple of things on the record. And so, when you take those risks, sometimes they work out for you. Sometimes they work out for you for a couple of years. Sometimes they backfire. So that's one part of this. And I think because they're willing to take risks, I wouldn't put anything past them as far as their team building this offseason. Offensively, you need an alpha wide receiver. We talked, I think, last week, and I mentioned A.J. Brown as a possibility, if they try to trade for him. But you need an alpha at that position. You need a younger tight end, Travis Kelce. God bless him. He's on his last leg, if that leg hasn't already fallen apart. You need help at running back. And defensively, you've got some significant questions. Like, when you watch Chris Jones, Tyler, are you concerned that he's declining if you're a Chiefs fan?
You have to be, and his effort some plays isn't there, and you wonder if after multiple Super Bowls and the personal success that he's had, does he just have that dog in him anymore to be hungry enough to fight through the whole season?
Yeah, and he's going to be 32 in July. So even if he has that dog in him, what is that in dog years? Like 300? I don't know. So you wonder if, does he have enough gas in the tank to have that kind of relentless motor that you probably need from him? He was so important to this team winning at the level they won. Everybody was so, and I get it, wrapped up with Patrick Mahomes, but Chris Jones was a vital part of this program, and the fact that they kept winning because he would just make impact plays on that side of the football. You mentioned the McDuffie thing. Would anybody be, surprised if he was traded? I wouldn't be. Brian Cook, their free safety, is also an unrestricted free agent. And what does that look like? So, and then you kind of look forward, Tyler, and you wonder, because you could sit there and say, well, you got Andy Reid, you got Mahomes, they've been able to find deals in certain ways, whether it's through the draft or, they find ways to kind of get their team the talent they need, or at least come close to that. You have to ask, do they have the resources to build this thing quickly? And they're still over $11 million over the cap, even with that Patrick Mahomes crazy manipulation, restructuring of the contract. And they only have top, they only have 3 picks in the top 75. They draft at 9, 40, but then 74. So, that's not a lot of ammunition to fill these holes.
Yeah, and I think that, we think about the Chiefs and there's so much built-in goodwill because of what they've done over the last couple of years. But you're right, they have so many holes on this roster and they aren't stocked with ways to fix that. Like you said, with the cap, with the lack of draft capital, I think this roster is further away than maybe people want to accept with Kansas City. And it's not just the roster. Over on Locked On Chiefs, they talked about how the scheme has kind of fallen behind the rest of the NFL as well.
People are tired of hearing me say it, but Vic Fangio took the Chiefs' offensive blocking schemes, both run blocking and pass protection, and just put a giant spotlight on them. And every team in the league knows how to beat that blocking scheme now. And that's, I think, was a big problem in 2025. They've got to kind of reinvent themselves a little bit. And if Andy Heck can do it, I mean, it's going to require help from Andy Reid because you're going to have to change things up with the offense too. I mean, you can't run it back with the same playbook for, a third straight year.
And I think part of that is why they brought Eric Bieniemy back and let Matt Nagy's contract expire. I think they wanted a little bit of a refresh there. But when you talk about how they could get this thing back on track, yes, they need Patrick Mahomes to get back healthy. An update on him is something we should expect to see in the next couple of months. Like, when do they expect him to be back? Because that could be a big problem for him if he's not ready to go right away. But Tyreek Hill, according to Tyreek Hill's Instagram, was in Kansas City earlier this week. Do you think a reunion there would be something that would make you feel that much better about the Chiefs going into this season?
No, I wouldn't touch him. The injury is a significant concern. Again, the off the field stuff, some of the times the on the field stuff. How's he fit? Feels like he wore out his welcome in Kansas City. Of course, some of that was money, I'm sure, because he wanted his big fat new contract. But yeah, I would not be looking at Tyreek Hill. He's also, I mean, how old is he? He's in his 30s right now.
He should be 32, 33 soon.
Yeah, he's going to be 32 in a couple of weeks. So I'm out on Tyreek Hill. And the Eric Bieniemy thing's interesting. I don't know how you felt about that hire, Tyler, because we didn't really talk about it. But I get the idea and pieces of like why you would bring him back. But I also just think you couldn't get a little bit more creative. You couldn't bring somebody in that has new ideas. And maybe Eric Bieniemy has learned a lot of different things over the past couple of years since being away from Kansas City. But it just felt like Andy Reid going back to his Rolodex, looking up a buddy and going, oh, yeah, Eric's available. Let's just bring him back. It wasn't something that would, for me, get me excited about that hire if I were a Chiefs fan.
No, I agree. And like in a similar vein to the Tyreek Hill unofficial visit this week, I mean, why else would he be in Kansas City? Let's be honest. It seems like Kansas City wants to go back more than they want to move forward. They want to bring Travis Kelce back and all that. And I'm not saying you let Travis Kelce walk and go somewhere else, but I just look at Kansas City as they're trying to find that old magic rather than create new magic going forward. And part of that is maybe eventually a split from Andy Reid is what will be necessary to make that new magic happen. But yeah, I am concerned about Kansas City going forward. And again, I think this offseason is kind of a crossroads for them and what they're going to be the next couple of years. But with that in mind, there are more crossroads teams in the AFC because I'm looking at 2 teams in the AFC North and the Baltimore Ravens and the Cincinnati Bengals who, with their quarterbacks were considered superpowers in the AFC for a few years, but they seem to be falling back more now than ever. Do want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Ever wanted to experience the NBA Finals live and in person? FanDuel is giving you the chance to turn that dream into a reality with their NBA sweepstakes. Here's how it works. Use your profit boost on any NBA future, and you'll automatically be entered for a shot to win an NBA Finals trip for 2. That's right, flights, tickets, the whole experience. If you're already looking at the board and thinking about which team can make a deep run, this is the perfect time to lock it in. And we all know that coming out of the break, the best part of the NBA season is about to begin. I got to tell you, looking at Knicks Celtics, it pains me to say it, but if they get Jason Tatum back, they're going to be a good pick to maybe go the distance, and you might be seeing them in the finals once again. Make sure that you visit FanDuel.com to get started. Use your profit boost on an NBA future and get entered for a chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. Play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, Nick, let's continue today's edition of Locked On NFL. Talked about the Kansas City Chiefs being in a little bit of crisis mode right now with the way that their team is, but I'm looking at two other teams in the AFC, again, the Baltimore Ravens and the Cincinnati Bengals, who might be falling back. And it's kind of interesting to see a lot of these top-tier quarterbacks and their teams maybe not taking that step forward. Maybe there's a changing of the guard going around. And one way that Baltimore is trying to prevent that changing of the guard is their coaching change this year. But one thing that I'm really looking at is the offensive coordinator hire. And my guy Kevin Ostreicher from Locked On Ravens talked about how the Ravens' new offensive coordinator, Declan Doyle, is trying to, make a good impression on Lamar Jackson.
First question was for Declan during this thing. And he was asked about how many times have you spoken with Lamar, Declan? And the answer was been able to speak to Lamar a few times, but he went into detail about one of them being through the interview process and that they sat for, he said, over an hour on a Zoom call when he was down in Florida, and they talked about a ton of different things, but going through his time in the past year and Lamar's vision for what he needs to be able to operate at the highest level. And what Declan wanted to see is, again, it's a two-way street. What Declan said is that he wanted to see if they were compatible and if that was a fit, and to look at kind of what the coaching structure was going to look like. And he also has had a chance to visit with them a few more times since then. They've exchanged some texts and, continued over the course of the press conference to say how excited he was to work with Lamar.
I would be excited to work with Lamar Jackson if I was a 29-year-old offensive coordinator too. This guy might take me to a head coaching job and make me look good, but I will continue to have this skepticism. I like Jesse Minter as an option, but a 29-year-old offensive coordinator who's never called plays, having to go in and design an offense for an MVP quarterback who has a ton of success in the league, has won playoff games, and is the same age as he is, I could just see Lamar Jackson. We talked about, trade options, and we both agreed it's certainly not likely that Lamar Jackson were to get traded this offseason. But I could absolutely see Baltimore with brand new coaches who have never been coaches before. I like when a young coach like Jesse Minter gets experienced coaches around him to kind of support him. But you're going and getting an offensive coordinator you've never worked with before, who's never called plays, who's not even 30 years old. You're a first-time head coach, and the expectations in Baltimore are incredibly high. They didn't make the playoffs, and that was enough to get rid of John Harbaugh. So I'm just looking at that, and I'm like, man, if things go poorly in Baltimore, they don't make the playoffs again, Lamar doesn't like this new young offensive coordinator that's the same age as he is, next offseason, we really could be talking about a quarterback that wants out of Baltimore, and that would be an outright disaster for the Baltimore Ravens.
I have tremendous respect for Eric DeCosta, the guy who runs that program in Baltimore. I think he's a very smart guy. It doesn't have anything to do with him being from New England, I do believe. But, Jesse Minter, he's a complete unknown as a head coach, as everybody is when they're hired for the first time in that position. This is like one of those plans that it's either going to look genius in like a year or two, or it's going to backfire, and it's probably going to backfire quickly. And what's fascinating, Tyler, you brought this up about, going with the young OC. It's interesting because when you look at what worked last year for New England and Chicago, what worked last year was, okay, Mike Vrabel comes in, and what's he do? His specialty is CEO guy, but he's also obviously a defensive side of the football guy.
Certainly.
And you bring in Josh McDaniels. When you're Ben Johnson in Chicago, you're an offensive guy. You bring in Dennis Allen, who is, a defensive coordinator years and years in the NFL. So it is a fascinating decision to bring in a 29-year-old offensive coordinator who's never called plays. And then you look at some of the other challenges. Tyler Linderbaum, It looks like he's going to hit free agency. He's one of the best centers in football. Your wide receiver position, I like Zay Flowers. He's not a number one guy. Rashad Bateman fell off a cliff. His health issues. Are you going to be able to get anything from Tez Walker? Derrick Henry is 32 years old, and as much as I respect the King, can he keep going? I do think defensively they'll be okay, especially with Minter, but there are some serious offensive questions. And again, the OC is the OC, and you got to hope that he jumps right in and does a great job for Lamar.
I'm not a huge proponent of Todd Monken. I admit that, but you're going to have a hard time convincing me that they didn't downgrade in a massive way going from Todd Monken to a guy who's 29 and never called plays before in the NFL. Like, I just can't. My brain can't logically accept that. So I'm looking at Baltimore, and in the AFC North, I don't know if the Steelers are going to win 10 games again. Can we count on Cincinnati, who we'll talk about here in a second? If Baltimore does not find a way to win that division this year, I think there might be some remorse with the Ravens. But maybe it does work out. Maybe the youth movement works for them.
Yeah.
We can't rule it out, but I just have a ton of skepticism.
One thing I will jump in and say, Jacksonville didn't go the route of the Patriots and the Bears, right? So you hire
True.
Liam Cohen, offensive guy, offensive play caller, and then Cohen brings in Anthony Campanelli from the Packers. And if you look at, he was never a defensive coordinator at the NFL level, so first-time play caller at that level. And frankly, when you look back at, his resume, he was a co-defensive coordinator for Boston College, but that was the only other than Don Bosco Prep apparently in New Jersey when he's calling plays defensively. So that did work with Cohen and Campanelli. So maybe it will work with Minter and Doyle. It's a very interesting approach.
Yeah, you can't rule it out. It could obviously work out, but I'm just going to remain skeptical until I'm proven wrong is how I feel about that one. My hope is real low. But we move to the other team in the AFC North, and it's the Cincinnati Bengals. And again, when we talk about skepticism, about getting better, I just have a hard time believing that the Cincinnati Bengals are going to be a better football team in 2026 without Trey Hendrickson. And it sounds like the Bengals might just let him walk for nothing, according to our guys from Locked On Bengals.
Should the Bengals be interested in tagging and trading Trey? Yes, they should be. Do we think they will? I think I'm less dismissive of that than the idea of them negotiating a return for Trey Hendrickson, but I would still be surprised. This is a team that has shown us in recent history that they are comfortable with letting guys go at the end of their contracts. They did it with Jesse Bates. They've done it with other players in the past where they haven't tried to recoup value. And I remember it driving fans crazy every time. Like, you're just going to let that guy walk and get nothing?
Listen, I understand that a tag and trade makes sense, but here's the problem for the Bengals. If they tag Trey Hendrickson and it takes a while for them to find a valuable trade, we know that the Bengals are historically stingy in trades. They don't make trades because they want to fleece people or they're not making a deal. So it makes sense for them to tag and trade Hendrickson, but if a trade takes a while because of their own stubbornness, well, the problem is now you're holding up all your cap space because he's on that tag for $27.5 million, and the Bengals need their cap space to be able to make the roster better, knowing that they're not going to have Hendrickson on the team. So they're in a very tough spot where we could get a third or a fourth round pick back for Hendrickson just to get something. You know what I mean? But you have to sacrifice your maneuverability in free agency to do that. And look, if they're letting Trey Hendrickson just go and leave, I'm sorry, Shamar Stewart was not a good draft pick. He didn't have a great season last year. They've been waiting for Myles Murphy to take off. They have a ton of question marks on that defense. Again, I just have a hard time seeing the Bengals being a better football team without Trey Hendrickson in 2026. And I'm looking at the Ravens and the Bengals with Lamar and Burrow like, man, this really could be that changing of the guard where Drake May, Bo Nix, guys like that, we think about Patrick Mahomes, Chiefs, the Bengals, the Ravens, these teams, when this could be one of those off seasons where it's like, oh, the power has truly shifted over to these younger quarterbacks.
Yeah, and I mentioned having some confidence in Eric DeCosta, who, by the way, is from Taunton, Massachusetts. So shout out Taunton. I mentioned DeCosta and having confidence, exact opposite with Cincinnati. I have zero confidence in their front office to figure this thing out. It feels like every single year we talk about them, their defense stinks and their offensive line isn't as good, or the offensive line stinks. They've had the same issues for years. Can they address the pass rush now with Hendrickson likely gone? I find it hard to believe they couldn't address the pass rush when they had Hendrickson. And to get no value for the guys, it's bananas. They should have just traded him in the offseason, and they didn't. It's just they make mistake after mistake. And they have to absolutely nail this draft. They have the 10th pick, 41st, and 72nd. That's their top 3 picks. So, maybe they have a great draft and things turn. But man, oh man, if I'm Joe Burrow, we know he sounded like he was a little bit tired at the end of the year after, again, the injuries and the accumulation of injuries, him coming back from the injury when he didn't have to finish out the year, which is commendable. But I mean, how many years are you going to go in if you're Joe Burrow looking at the O-line going, can they protect me? And how many years are you going to walk in and say, I feel like we got to drop 42 points to win this football game? It just feels like, and yet they had a little bit of a better showing as the year went on for that Cincy defense later in the season, a little bit. But I don't have much confidence, man. I just don't have much confidence in that program to build a sustainable winner.
Yeah, they're getting further away from where they need to go, and the further that they get away, the less confident I am that they can get back to it, and their own stubbornness. This is the problem with mom and pop organizations in big time, sports leagues. If you run your team like a mom and pop family business, you're going to be more susceptible to emotion, to stubbornness, to pettiness, to loyalty and things like that, because you're running it like you're the corner store in the small town in Mayberry, USA, rather than the Fortune 500 company, which you actually should be operating as a big-time billionaire sports business. So I just look at Cincinnati like they get in their own way. They should, like you said, they should have traded Hendrickson last offseason, and they could have got way better value.
Yep. Yeah, it just doesn't make any sense. And, you look at how these operations are run, and it just feels like, did you need T. Higgins? I know Joe Burrow wanted T. Higgins, but it feels like you probably could have got a pretty good return for T. Higgins and stood by Trey Hendrickson. Of course, Hendrickson got hurt, but it's just the idea of what is your philosophy? What are you going in? Do you want to win every week based on Joe Burrow? If so, you got to have a great offensive line. So it's just the pieces to me, they don't connect well. And I don't know if that's going to change. I don't see anything. There's nobody new that's brought in to change that. So you just feel like if you're a Cincinnati fan, you kind of feel like, here we go again. I'm going to be disappointed in this offseason, how they approach it and what they do.
It just seems like a lot of short-term thinking and not a lot of long-term planning for the Bengals. And it's coming home to roost with a team that's far too talented to miss the playoffs as often as they have during Joe Burrow's prime. But with that being said, we do need to move over to the NFC because there are some NFC superpowers like the Eagles and the Lions who also might be maybe falling a bit back. Do want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by 5 Hour Energy. Welcome to the 5 Hour Energy Flavor Draft. We're looking at every aspect of the draft to let you know which tasty flavor is the best and which flavor might just be a sleeper. The board is set, the flavors are ready, and only one is going to take the top spot. 5 Hour Energy has a wide variety of flavors. There's something for everyone. 5 Hour Energy shots give you a boost with zero sugar, which is super important to me. When it comes to making my number one pick of the flavors for 5 Hour Energy, I got to go with grape, man. The Concord grape flavor, it's similar to grape juice or a grape candy, soft, rounded sweetness. It's smooth, almost a syrup-like fruit profile. Very consistent, straightforward taste. It's got that classic purple candy style finish. And I got to tell you, for my, day 3 sleeper, I'm going with the peach mango. It's got that ripe peach flavor on the first sip. The mango adds a little tropical depth and sweetness. It's slightly richer on the mouthfeel than the citrus flavors. Sweet, aromatic finish, balanced tropical blend. Boy, it's making my mouth water right now. Find your new favorite flavor of 5 Hour Energy shots available online at 5, that's the number 5, hourenergy.com or on Amazon. All right, Nick, let's cap off today's edition of Locked On NFL. Looking at some teams who might be taking a step back from where they had been prestige-wise over the last few years. We hit three superpowers in the AFC in the Chiefs, the Ravens, and the Bengals with three elite quarterbacks that just haven't hit their peak over the last season, maybe more for Bengals and Ravens fans. But now I want to go to the NFC because there are some teams that I am a bit worried about, and number one is the Philadelphia Eagles. And with all of the concern, we know that Lane Johnson is coming back now. That's been confirmed. But Landon Dickerson at guard, that's still up in the air. You lose Jeff Stoutland, who is considered maybe the best offensive line coach in the NFL over the last quarter of a century. Saquon Barkley, is he going to be able to hold up as he gets older? They have some questions and some free agents on the defensive side, and they got to deal with a name that we talked about earlier in the show, A.J. Brown. And my guy Louis DiBiase from Locked On Eagles talked about, is he in? Is he out of Philadelphia?
I don't know at this point. I'm 50-50. A.J. Brown getting traded or not, I can't figure this out. It feels like he wants out. It feels like he wants to stay. Today on Instagram, A.J. Brown posts that he's doing his football camp in May in Allentown in Pennsylvania near Philadelphia. He's in an Eagles jersey in the post. Says fly, Eagles fly. I know that might not be nothing in a vacuum, or might not be something in a vacuum. His team probably posted that. But when you add that on top of the comments he made in the Micah Parsons podcast, it sounds like he'd be willing to run it back in 2026. But then Jeremy Fowler says the Eagles will entertain trade offers in a couple weeks for Brown. Your guess is as good as mine. I would still say I'm probably 51-49 that he's back next year, but I think everything is on the table. Trade talks haven't happened yet, so this is all still pure speculation, but I don't know what to think, man. I want him back, but who knows?
I mean, I would just look at the Eagles in a totally different way if they didn't have A.J. Brown. Now, maybe that's just how I view A.J. Brown as a player and how important that I think he is to an offense. But without A.J. Brown in the lineup, with Saquon getting older, with the offensive line falling off last year, with Jalen Hurts, with the offensive coordinator hire that I don't like in Sean Mannion, I'm just looking at Philadelphia, and I don't see them in the past couple of years. They go to the Super Bowl. Last year coming in, you're like, oh, they're a Super Bowl favorite after they win it. I don't know that, I did my predictions earlier this week. I went with the Dallas Cowboys to win that division. I think the Giants are going to be improved. I would not have the Eagles as a clear, obvious favorite in their division if they trade away A.J. Brown.
I mean, all the stuff you say about the offense is obviously a big question, right? The offensive line stuff, A.J. Brown's future. By the way, the Philadelphia fan base, man, it feels like they just – do you really want A.J. Brown with all the drama? I know he's a really good football player, but how many times do you have to go through the cycle of A.J. Brown being mad at the quarterback, mad at the coaching staff? Maybe you just love it. I don't know, but it's fascinating to watch from the outside looking in how, Eagles, I see Eagles fans on social media saying A.J. Brown's going nowhere. I think you should ask yourself the question, should he go somewhere? Is it time? Is it too much water under the bridge at this point where you just got to move on no matter how good he is? But defensively, you've got questions, right? Do you bring back Jalen Phillips? Free safety, cornerback, you got a couple of holes there. I do though believe that Philly will be okay, and it's mostly because of Howie Roseman. I think the dude is a wizard. I think he's a great evaluator of talent. They have 4 picks in the top 100. They have almost $20 million in cap space, and of course they can create even more. They have an owner in Jeffrey Lurie who's never afraid to pay a lot of money and go over that cap with this cash spending. And the Nick Sirianni, Sean Mannion thing is a huge question, but will this team have the talent? With or without A.J. Brown, I do think Howie Roseman will find a way to put a very talented football team on the field. It's, can Jalen Hurts play better, and can he have an offense that runs efficiently and well, and can Nick Sirianni keep his head on his shoulders?
You know what? Let's be real. They're going to trade for Max Crosby, and then we're all going to be like, the Eagles are back, you know what I mean? But one team that I'm less confident in keeping their spot in the NFC, because the erosion has already begun, is the Detroit Lions. But my guy Matt Derry from Locked On Lions thinks this team is actually just a couple pieces away from getting back to where they were.
But if they can get this secondary healthy and get Kirby Joseph and Brian Branch back, and Branch is so important, they can build this defensive line. They can get a center. right? Whether it's Linderbaum, whether it's McGovern, whether they draft one. Get somebody right at the head of the snake there that's snapping the football on every offensive play that can be better than what they have this year. I still like what this team does. I still love the talent on this team. I love the young talent on this team. The fact that 6 guys this past week were in Santa Clara for the Pro Bowl games shows you that people around the league respect this team.
It's great that they respect him, but Shedeur Sanders and Joe Flacco were at the Pro Bowl, so I can't say that the Lions having 6 people at the Pro Bowl means that they're good. The reality is they have questions on the D-line. The offensive line is deteriorating. Taylor Decker not going to be back. That's a huge question mark at left tackle. Jared Goff showed that, outside of structure, if the play doesn't work without Ben Johnson scheming things wide open, he's nowhere near the level of quarterback that, he looked like a couple of years ago. And a lot of these things for me come down to the coaching hires. I absolutely despised the hire of Drew Petzing as offensive coordinator. If you look at the Arizona Cardinals last year, the biggest issue with the Arizona Cardinals was Drew Petzing at offensive coordinator. So now you take him over the Lions because Dan Campbell is feeling bad and guilty about him taking over play calling duties and it not working out. I think that's a terrible hire. I think their offense is going to be even worse than it was last year. And with the rosters go quick in the NFL. That's why they call it not for long. That's NFL stands for not for long. These things happen quick. I think we're seeing the slow degradation of the Detroit Lions. I'm not going to have them making the playoffs this year either.
I don't have them dead yet. They're still relatively young. They've got to get healthy and stay healthy. I mean, this team has gone through so many freaking injuries, but the defensive line does need help. Then you could look at Robertson in the defensive backfield, Amik Robertson, and then you also have Alex Anzalone, who are unrestricted free agents.
And he's mad at the team right now. They put out a social media post and didn't include him, and he's angry.
That's so 2026 what you just said.
It is.
But they're still, again, they're relatively young. Dan Campbell is a good coach as far as, getting his guys ready to play and believing in themselves and all that stuff. I do think he sets a pretty good culture. The biggest challenge, though, is they just don't have a ton of resources. So, again, they've got to stay healthy. They've got to make smart and shrewd decisions in free agency. They don't have a ton of space. They only have 2 picks in the top 100 in the draft. So they've got to find ways and get creative to add to their roster while keeping their fingers crossed that their young guys stay healthy and also, meanwhile, develop. Jahmyr Gibbs fell off a cliff late in the year. Why was that? You've got to fix that. That dude has to be one of your studs. I'm not ready to write them off completely, but it will be a challenging offseason to try to find ways to improve the football team.
And if we remember, the reason they were able to build up that roster is because they made the Jared Goff trade. They had a bunch of extra draft capital. So you're right. They don't have as much capital to work with, and that makes the margin for error much, much slimmer, which makes, like you said, it even more important that they hit on the stuff that they do have in front of them. But that's going to do it for today's edition of Locked On NFL. I am your host, the Madman, Tyler Rowland, for my co-host, Nick Cattles, as we tell you every single episode. Thanks for tuning in. And stay safe out there.